Alright, so I'm just made up a little bit more dark, and I'm going to go into some water. Okay, ultramarine blue, burnt umber with a little bit of the crimson. And wipe the ferrule. Now in the mouth area, and I'm going to sort of scribble it, except the bottom, because the bottom it needs to be quite clean, because it's a hard edge. When I say a hard edge, where hair overlaps hair, that's soft edges. Where an object ends, okay, that's a hard edge. So although the hair, the fur, is part of the face, the lip is a hard edge. The outside of the lip is not attached. Look, think of your own lips. Even though they're attached to your chin and attached to your underneath your nose, the actual outside of the lips are a hard edge. Hope the camera's staying in focus there. Okay, I'm just going to pick up a little bit more water, no paint. And I'm just going to come in here. This is all in shadow in here. This is inside the mouth. Okay. I did this dry. I didn't wet the paper first. And I'm probably going to have to go to a smaller brush. Tongue is there. You want to try to use the biggest brush you possibly can. And see, now this is, I think, now my third or fourth layer of this dark over here. If you're using really cheap watercolor paper, it's just going to kind of flake up. The fibers will start to come up. It won't be able to take any of the abuse of watercolors. Okay. So I'm liking how this is working. There's no graphite in here, so I'm not worried about covering it up. I'm really liking how this is working. Underneath the tongue, where the teeth are, it's dark. It's dark in here, underneath the tongue. Woo! You gotta make those noises when you paint too. Woo! And then, let's see, where are we here? There's a little bit of dark right in here. And in between the teeth. What's in here? This has got a little bit of red in it, so I'm just going to splotchy, splotchy, splotchy. I actually can go right over the tooth. Silly me, I've got the drawing gum there to protect it. Here we go. I know it looks kind of a mess right now, doesn't it? Now, while we're here, let's take a little bit. Now, this is where I wasn't quite sure. This is where I'm going to use some of the white. I'm just going to take the blot, a little bit of that dark out of there. There we go. A little bit of white and alizarin crimson. I don't know if the camera's going to be able to focus on that. More white. And what I'm looking at doing is I'm looking at getting a pink for the tongue. And I'm going to start lighter than what I need. Okay, so white with just a little bit of alizarin crimson. A bit more water. And the tongue. Actually, this is pretty good. That's actually pretty good. Okay. Fresh paper towel. Also doing this on dry paper. I do need to go to a smaller brush though. Make sure that I get the pink going over that tooth. Let's see, his mouth comes over, it comes up like this, and it comes down, and it goes into the back. Not a lot of graphite work in there either. I'm going to pick up a little bit more crimson in my dirty brush. Not too much. I may have to tap into some white a little bit. Just right at the back in here, because it's quite dark. Wipe the brush and just kind of soften that in there. As it's drying, it's getting a little too light. And where the light color is, it's going to make now kind of like a little ridge. Alrighty. With that same brush, now I won't be able to get too close for this part. I'm actually going to go to a smaller brush. Hang on a second. Let me go to a smaller brush. I'm going to go to that 10-0 liner. Load up with that dark in the nostril. Ooh, too much water in there. Hopefully it stays contained. And this comes up like this, comes down, and goes like this. When I paint with any type of oils, not so much, but acrylics and watercolor, acrylics with the watercolor medium and regular acrylics, is I like to start small and then slowly build it up. Things tend to get bigger. I don't know if that's by accident or just things kind of spread out, so I like to start small and grow from there. Now I could take that same brush and I'm just going to scumble over. When I say scumble, it's kind of like scratchy over the dry paper, and I'm just going to go over the dark areas. And as the paint runs out of my brush, I'm going to work my way down a little bit. This is very dark right here. This brush is a little too long for what I want to do. And this actually comes down right here. There we go. Still a little bit light, but I'm going to let that dry first before I do anything else. Oh, wait. Bit more paint. See, as the paper's curling, the paint is kind of working with gravity. If you have a little table that you can arch your paper on an angle where the top part is higher, that actually is pretty good if you can do that. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry now. Now I'm going to come back with my small brush and I'm going to apply another layer of transparent yellow iron oxide, but this time I'm putting a little bit of red iron oxide into it. That's better. This is actually very close to the color of the eye in the photograph. There we are. Oops, you couldn't see what I was doing. I'm sorry. There we are. So, I'm going to let, no, I could probably start working on this just a little bit more. Let me get the heat gun out to this and just dry it up a little bit, and then I'll start adding a little bit more detail. But so far, I'm really liking the way this is turning out. I have a funny feeling I will be able to rescue that other drawing. Alright, so I got a fresh little tray. I got a whole bunch of these trays with my palette. And what I'm going to do now is go back in. I'm going to get, I'm going to go to my filbert, my number 10 filbert, and I'll put some water. Don't do this over your painting like I am. Transparent red iron oxide and a little bit of yellow iron oxide and a little bit of burnt umber. I want to warm this up just a little bit more. This may be a little too intense. Now, one thing somebody emailed me when I was doing the different demonstrations. I got an email from one of my students, and she said, "How come when you create chromatic black, which is black with color, you use burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, but when you want to create when you want to kind of knock something down, when you use transparent red iron oxide and transparent yellow iron oxide, okay, why don't you add blue to that? And I say, well, that's because the transparent yellow iron oxide, so think of yellow and blue will make green, and I want green fur. That's why I use burnt umber a lot. When it's animal fur, when I want to create a dark warm brown, where burnt umber is not red enough, but I want to make it with just transparent red iron oxide and blue because it'll be too purple. So that's why I just use the red iron oxide, yellow iron oxide, and a little bit of burnt umber. No blue. So that's actually quite lovely. And need to dry this or wet this a little bit. So go over that. When I distribute the water throughout the painting, as little movement as possible with the brush because it'll lift up the previous layer. Now I'm going to come in and I'm just going to some areas where I'm going to make it a little bit darker. Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Oh, I'm so happy this is working. I am so happy this is working. I had not so much had my doubts. Well, it's the paper as well. I'm using mixed media paper. I don't like using expensive paper with experiments. Expensive watercolor paper because it can start to add up. But this is adding just enough darkness that I can still see my graphite. Once you can't see your graphite anymore, you've got too much paint on there. See, I've got a hard edge here. I'm going to come in and I'm just going to work that in. Paper towel, and soften that up. It's a little dry here. I'm going to take some water and I'm just going to come in with a little bit of water. Just going to do this section first. Okay. And you should be able to see the actual paint traveling. If it's not, then your paper is still not wet enough. See how I can just move that down? It just fades right out. When I use my spray bottle, the paper dries much faster than if I use my brush. Because I'm working with the same color, I can just come in with that brush, even if it's got paint in it, and I can just come in. Don't do the eye area. And I'm wetting the paper at the same time. Not going to go over everywhere with this color. Where you want the highest contrast is where you have a lot of that drawing gum. There we go. That's looking better. The dog is not as gray. This is now more of a warm brown. This is actually turning out quite nice. But I will pick up in my other tray a little bit of this dark mix. Okay, now this has blue in it, so we're going to have to be careful. I'm going to go into this tray right in here. There we go. That's actually not too bad. And now where the fur is shaded, and I'm going to put in the color first, then I'll come in and adjust it. Just where there's shadows. Very flaky, not flaky, feathery stroke. His nose area is quite dark. So when we take off that gum, that drawing gum, it's going to make such a difference. Because it'll be the white of the paper. And I think I'm pretty well now close to being done adding the watercolor. Adding the, sorry, when I say watercolor, I mean the Traditions paints with the watercolor medium. Okay, just gonna get a little bit of water in there. Just gonna feather this out. But even with saying, okay, I'm starting where I can't see the graphite, I have to let this dry. Because don't forget, this dries lighter than normal. So I'm just going to let this dry now. So this part here, I'm going to let this dry naturally by air. So I'm looking at probably, at least a half an hour for this to dry. And then when we come back, I'll put, actually what I can do is I can put another layer of paint in here. Then when we come back is that we can start taking the gum off. Alright, so the piece is now dry. And I'm just using a rubber eraser just to pull the masking gum off. Sometimes I find it easier with my fingers. I actually like doing it better with my fingers because I can actually feel where it is. And you see how the white shows up? I can see obviously where my strokes were a little large, but that's okay. That's the beauty of an experiment. That's why I like doing everything and put it in my journal and make some notes. Look at that. Now, if I was doing this on my own, off camera, this would actually be just dumping this into a garbage can. But I'm just going to dump it right now on the floor, and then I'll have to make sure I vacuum after, or get Joe to vacuum. Carefully over the eye. There we go. So the strokes are a little bit big, but that's the purpose of the experiment. There we go. Teeth are perfect. There we are. Doesn't he look much better now, not being all kind of funny with that gray stuff? Now you can see where, now with the Irish Wolfhound, that's the one thing, is that they're straggly. Okay, and myself, I know that I was tempted to kind of refine the stroke, but no, I had to really avoid doing that. Now, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find a nice liner brush. Okay, so it's a number 0 liner, and I'm going to go in to what? I'm going to go into what? If I go into transparent red iron oxide by itself, and I'll just do it right here. See how bright those strokes are? Okay, it's a little bright. Oh, but you know what? Once I wipe it off, it's even better. Okay, what that means that doesn't mean that you basically do it all with paint and wipe it down. Add more water. There we go. This is actually going to be a darker area. I'm just testing the color. So transparent. Did I say red iron oxide? Yellow iron oxide. And I'm just going to go over like so. Now, if you were doing this in acrylics, that actually turns out quite nice. If you're doing this in acrylics, you could, with absolutely no problem, just add the highlights with white tinted with some other color, but with watercolors you can't. So I'm going to go over the entire piece, and this is going to make it rich. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? That fur just comes alive. Now this is the sunny area, so I'm going to put a little bit more of the paint and a little less water, but we can't leave it like that. Wipe the brush immediately and just push it back like so. Push it back. And I'll come in, I'll refine it a little bit more. I'm not worried about that. Now, I can pretty well guarantee that if I was doing this as an experiment on a sheet of watercolor paper that was $15, I could pretty well guarantee that I would be so picky and I would be nervous and basically, you know, really, to put it bluntly, I'd be anal about everything I was doing. But because I'm doing this just on multimedia paper, mixed media paper, in my mind as an experiment, this is turning out really nice because there's no pressure. The worst thing that could happen, the piece is ruined. This sheet cut into pieces, I would have lost maybe 25 cents. Wow. Holy moly macaroni. I can come in between now, just add a bit more paint, just in between some areas, just to darken. This is quite dark right here in the photograph. Don't leave it like that. Come back in and soften that area out. A little bit more yellow iron oxide. Okay, just wanted to, I'm going to have to do some work there. Fade that out. Fade that out. Okay, a little bit of water in my brush. Here we are. Oh, my microphone's getting caught in my shoulder. All right, so now now while this dries, now I'm gonna come in and I want to start refining. Everything's done with the liner brush to refine. And I'm going to come in, first thing is in the mouth here. I'm going to add a little bit of alizarin crimson, spotty, 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 which is part of the gum. You know, the red gum that shows through. Yeah, and I'm using my fingers to blot. I should use a mop brush. And I'm just going to put a little bit more crimson. It's the washy, washy, washy crimson. Okay, that's all right. Happy with that. That highlight is way too dark, so I'm going to take a little bit of white with that chromatic black that I made up, that really, really dark. With a little bit of white, I'm making a gray. And I'm just going to come in. Oh, let's just go with the chromatic black. I just need to knock that down a little bit. Okay, there we go. It's not taking much now. Now, this dark that I made up here, okay, with lots of water, blot on the brush and come in here and now start adding some strokes. Now I can come in with paint, but there's another thing that I can do. You have to wait for the paper to dry though. You come in with a graphite pencil. And I'm not going to try to cover up all the lines here, the white, but I'm going to go in between to bring in some darks. See? Doesn't take much, does it? You don't want your paper sopping wet for this. And make sure you overlap the strokes. These strokes were a little, they're way too long. These need to be really straggly. Like that. Now let that dry a little bit. Actually, I want to get my heat gun and I'm going to dry that for a sec. It's much faster with graphite. Okay, so with the brush, now with the brush, I have to be very careful because I want to make sure that the strokes are very fine. Okay, see, it's the same thing. Think of graphite. Graphite's a bit silvery. Okay, where paint is pigment. The only thing you gotta be careful is that make sure you wipe the ferrule. Okay, now here, see how it kind of got all smushy? Now I can come in and fix that up. So I'm coming in with that dark, but now what I can do is come in just with transparent red iron oxide and a little bit of water. It's really dark in here. Dark and straggly. I mean, it's the poor thing looks like it's, and this is the characteristic of the dog, but it looks like it just, you know, ate slop out of a bowl and didn't clean its mouth. But that's the way it is. Shih Tzus are like that too. They look so dirty under their mouth. Even Chaos, Kitty Cat Chaos, I mean, she was like that too. So straggly. Then once that dries, I'm just going to do it now because we're running out of time, is I'll come in now with burnt umber and kind of go over to overlap some strokes. Now I could even come in on my dirty brush with white and go the other way just to make it really straggly. And I want to come in a little bit more paint here. So you can still keep playing with this. Right over the graphite. There we go. So I think with this experiment, let me just make a few more adjustments here. I think with this experiment that the one thing that I'm going to make a note on, first of all, is to replace my brush. So I'm going to make a note of what this is. 140 pound mixed media paper and Traditions with watercolor medium, 50-50, plus sprays of water on palette. The type of palette doesn't matter. Okay. Royal Soft Grip. And we had, let's see, and all I'm doing is writing down what I use. So a 3/4 flat, number 8 and 4 round. And I know the number 8 would have worked for the whole thing if I had not ruined it with something else. Number 10 filbert. And let's see, a 10, I can't see, a 10-0 liner, and a number 0 liner. Anything else? The drawing gum. Okay, so now I have a basic idea. I'll write down the colors that I used as well. And from at this point here, and it's just a matter now, I can keep playing with it. I already know at this point what's going to work and what's not going to work. And the one thing that I definitely need, note, needs more control with strokes while applying drawing gum. Okay, because that's where I got into trouble down here. So now I know I need to have a little bit more control when doing my strokes. I also know that I will not use this paper. Okay, I won't use this paper when creating my actual piece, but I will probably come in more with the graphite for the detail. See, with the paint it's fine, but I'm liking the graphite a little bit better, because the whole idea of this was a drawing and how I could fix up that other one. So now that I know, see how I got all these nice contrasts in here now? And then now it's just a matter of just really fine-tuning, and although this is an experimental piece, I don't want to spend all day doing this because that's not the purpose of this. I also have to redo. I also lost some of the eye. I lost some of the eye. So I'm going to come in with transparent red iron oxide, being very careful next to that hair stroke, and put that in there. Here we go. And I can come in, refine the blacks a little bit with my graphite pencil. After all, it is a drawing that I'm working on. But with graphite being down first and then watercolors, that's not new. That's typically how things are done. Some artists like the graphite showing through. I do. And some artists prefer not to have the graphite showing through. That's completely up to you. I also know now that if I were to do this again, I'm going to really narrow down that stroke. Really, really narrow that down. Okay, that's too thick. As well is to come over a little bit like that. Okay, and then just come in and just refine, whether you want to do it with a paintbrush or your pencils. That's up to you. But these white lines here, they need to be knocked down just a little bit more. I'm going to back up a little bit so you can see the whole piece. Okay, and I can come in here now. So just make it a little bit more rich. Now, if you wanted to make your doggy more on the cooler side, you just use more of the blues. See, his fur is going to be really rich now. And because I put that graphite down first, it's going to be really beautiful. Look how rich that color is getting. But as before, make sure that you don't just leave that the way it is. You gotta do some extra work. Feather that out. There we go. And the other thing that if you're going to do your adjustments at the end with graphite instead of paint, make sure that your graphite is no softer than a 2B. An HB is actually better, because if your graphite is too soft, it's going to dissolve. There we go. And don't use cheap dollar store pencils, because it won't work. The graphite's very dirty. There we go. Just feather this out. I need to pick up a little bit more water just to soften this a little bit more. And I'm going to get a bigger brush for this part. There we go. Bit more water. Wherever the paint ends, you add water at the end, and the paint will just kind of look. It'll seek out the water and it'll just thin out so beautifully. And remember, this will dry a little bit lighter. Just cleaning that edge. No hard, when you're working with animals, the only hard edge should be the lip, the nose. If the dog or the pet was a short-haired, where, you know, hindquarters, end of legs, that type of thing. There we go. But see how fuzzy this is? And at this point now, I would say I'm done the study. Going to come in with just a little bit more transparent red iron oxide for the pupil. For the iris. And when that's dry, I'll come in with more paint for the actual pupil. And I'm pretty happy with this. This turned out really well. So now what I can do is, although if I really wanted to simulate this experiment to be exact, what I should have done was create this drawing on the actual same drawing paper. So let's put this aside, and I'm not going to complete this entire painting on camera, but just to show a stroke. There's an awful lot of graphite on here, so the first thing I would need for sure to come in is probably come in with some Spectrafix fixative, because there's so much graphite on here and it may dissolve. But because there's really nothing else I can do with this painting, first of all, I can come in and see what would happen with the blanket. And if I come in with the blanket and come in with, you know, any type of the medium, is come in here in this darn stupid spot that I want to get rid of. And although I might not be able to get rid of the whole thing, I can turn that into a black stripe. So I'm just tinting this and come in by the ear. I'm doing this dry. And all I'm coming in is with that wash that we put over the other dog. I also would take this out of the journal as well. That actually stays pretty good. Now if I take that dark pigment, that chromatic black, see, now you can't see that spot all that well. So this works out, and because now this paper is a bit wet, it's taking the water and it's kind of fuzzing it out for the blankie. Okay, the doggy is actually, oh, I didn't bring the picture up. That little doggy is a beige doggy, but if I took transparent yellow iron oxide, which is a little bit strong, now I didn't put any fixative on here, so this is all going to be, we'll have to see what happens type of thing. I'm going to put that over the whole thing. And you know what? You would think that because you're putting paint on this that it would protect the graphite once it's dry, and it doesn't. I could still come in and erase some of the pieces. Bit more transparent yellow iron oxide, and if I happen to say red by accident, okay, just because I'm an idiot and I'm not paying attention. It's a very light. Now because this is the actual drawing paper, the Bristol vellum, I have to be careful how much water I put in. The pigment's not the problem, it's the water. Because as the water goes into the paper, that's when it starts to warp. There we go. Beautiful. This is turning out really lovely. So without that experiment that I did before, I would not have known. I would have given up on this painting. But now that I see that I can salvage it, now I feel a lot better. So just a little bit more paint. Over the entire doggy. Pick up a little bit more water. I'm being very careful with how much water I put in this now. Now what I have done though, not with this paper here, but with other types of drawing paper, more with working in my journal, is I've actually pressed it in my book press, and it flattens it out. But I mean, you can do the same thing with telephone books. Soften that out. Wow. See, adding some color to it. A little bit more yellow iron oxide. That's dried. Come around the nose. And I'm working with the large brush because it's fast right now. And I've put this in my journal because, again, as a drawing by itself, I couldn't use it. But now, you can barely see. You can barely see that. The spit mark. You can barely see it. Oh my goodness. But yeah, next time though, to work on this, take it out of your journal. Don't leave it in like that. I'll just apply that same wash right here. Now I'm on an angle now. That's the paw. Go right over the rivet. There we go. And now, go to a smaller brush with transparent, no, not red. I really do mean yellow this time. Yellow, yellow, yellow. There we go. Beautiful. So now I have an idea how I could have salvaged this. The actual color of the dog, if I had to get a closer color, I would think probably more raw sienna. Raw sienna though, very, very opaque. So, but with the watercolor medium, it becomes more transparent. There we go. And now if I take even a little bit of that the dark mix right in here. Now remember, because this is water, it's not saying water mixable, but I can reconstitute it with moisture. Whatever I'm putting down here, unless that yellow's had a chance to dry, that dark is just going to pick it up. My next layer of color, I should say. So keep that in mind when you're doing your layers. Now, do I need to come in with dark for the nose? Well, I could if I wanted to, just to make it more uniform. Okay, the eyes, I'm not even going to touch the eyes right now. The ears, a little bit darker on the ears. Because I used primarily the, I didn't use anything softer than a 4B pencil. That's a lie actually. The eye I used an 8B. The graphite doesn't smush around, but once you put the layer on there, and if you keep playing and playing and playing, it will eventually start to dissolve. So that's why you gotta let your stuff dry. And if you're really concerned about it, get out the old Mighty Fixative. Now, the only fixative I use is Spectrafix because I can use that indoors and it's non-toxic. That's the only one that I'll use. That's the only one also that when I teach a drawing technique or a pastel, whatever technique that needs fixative, that I actually send a bottle home with the students, telling them this is the only thing they can use. There we go. So also very, very quickly done. I now feel a little bit better that I can do something, and now basically this can become a painting all on its own. And it's just a matter now of just going in and making adjustments where I need. So now I can come in now, think of now this more as a painting and work on it from that standpoint. It doesn't become so much a drawing. It becomes more of a painting. But I tell you, when I sneezed on this thing, oh my God, and I saw what I did, I was just devastated. I was so upset. This part's here is too wet. I have to let that dry before doing more work on it. Now all I'll do is that when I'm drawing, I'm going to turn with my back against the heat vent, or better yet, just close the vent while I'm drawing. So there we go. Something that I was ready to throw in the garbage, I was able to recover it somehow. Again, not a formal painting anymore, but I can still play with it. If I could turn this actually to a formal painting by using the traditions with the watercolor medium, and then if areas that I want more opaque, just use less of the medium and just build it up from there. But I really like playing with this. I really love the way this one turned out. And although the dog in the actual photograph is gray, I liked it with the warm tones. And I can build this up even more. Okay, but again, it was all about experimenting with between the graphite and the paint, getting it to work together to try to salvage this little thing. Doing this formally, I would use a lot more graphite with this. If I had to do this dog, I would put it more on the charcoal gray sides, more with the blues. But as I was going through the paints, I really fell in love with the warm tones. So I really hope that you enjoyed this and that you're going to give it a shot. And I will see you next time. In closing, happy painting and stay inspired.